Hello, folks. My name is Brandon Bryce, and once again, this is americasfuture.org. Today's topic, we're talking about why are Michigan schools failing? Why? But we've got the experts today to tell you why. Joining me to my immediate left, your right, we've got Ben DeGrow. He is the education director for the Mackinac Center for Public Policy, a guru when it comes to ed reform. And below me, we have Terrace E. Todd. He's the former White House Director of Educational Excellence and the man, the myth, the legend when it comes to ed reform and changing schools for the better. Let's start off with Ben DeGrow. I mean, Ben, when you hear about this challenge of education reform and you hear that schools are failing in the states, not just in Michigan, but throughout the country, what are some of the reasons that we're suffering failing school districts when we're in the age of AI and technology? Your thoughts?
All right. Well, yeah, first of all, Brandon, thanks for having me on the conversation. It's a big issue I'm passionate about. And let's start with some big thoughts, big issues, right? Michigan, our educational achievement levels, they're measured by national tests or graduation rates or whatever, have been at a plateau, or plateau is probably not the right word, but they've been flat for years while other states have been passing us by. We're going down the rankings. And it's not just a urban problem. It's not a Detroit problem. It's not a rural problem. It's a whole state problem. The achievement levels are kind of stuck. And I offer up, there's lots of, possible reasons why. I think we got a system that's maybe, well, first of all, takes parents for granted, right? So anybody who's run a successful school, which isn't me, but you know that you got to have a partnership with the parents. The educators got to treat the parents as a partner, and the parents got to be recognized as the primary educator and decision maker for the child. If you got that relationship in place, you got the beginning of success. But in a lot of places, school systems are taking kids for granted, and they're getting, over the last 5, 6, 7 years, schools are getting funded more and more, but the results aren't coming with it. So we treat, you got big, broader problems like we treat teachers all the same, regardless of how effective they are. We know there's some really great teachers out there, but they're not getting rewarded and put in front of the kids who need their help the most. So I'll offer up those as a couple things. There's probably a lot more. Terrace probably has some good ideas.
Terrace, let me ask you this. There was a story that I actually watched last night that talked about George McKenna, a famous public school teacher in Los Angeles during the South Central and during some of the gang activities. When you hear stories like this about failing school districts, specifically in Black and brown neighborhoods, we've seen it. We know what the problem is, but why does the problem still continue to happen?
I have to agree with what Ben was saying in regards to parents. Schools are supplemental. Education begins at home. Everybody knows that. But never in our wildest dreams did we think that we would be in a place where, in particularly, like you mentioned, in the Black and brown communities, you have over 70% of those households being headed by single parents. That's a huge blow to education in general, and also to students. You're talking about students that are traumatized. I mean, try being raised by one parent. Parents or families are the cornerstone of every society. And anytime we kind of just don't really take a hard look at that, I think we do ourselves a huge disservice. And like Ben said, in the education field, it seems like it's the only sector, or one of the sectors, that continue to get all of this funding, which is, again, why we should be pushing back on current President Joe Biden's proposal of all this money getting thrown at education systems again, but yet it doesn't resolve anything. It's like failure gets rewarded. You know what I mean? And that's exactly been the norm. I mean, we come out and, politicians, I mean, they're real big on making for sure that they pad the pockets of their buddies. That's just the bottom line. You have a bureaucracy, and our kids are a part of it. And that's very unfortunate. But again, going back to what I was saying, schools and families should be in partnership, and Ben is absolutely right. I think parents and families have been taken for granted. I mean, like the issue of school choice, how crazy is that, that you would tell black and brown people that they don't get a choice, even though my time at the Department of Ed, 73% of black households and 71% of Hispanics, they want school choice. Why is that so hard to understand? You know, parents and families should have a right to decide what is best for their child, and what they feel like is going to set their child up for a successful future. And so why you are against that is very clueless to me, other than the fact you're trying to appease or appeal to your special interest groups. That's the only reason why, you know. So I think, again, a big part of it is because, again, families, like I said, never in our wildest dreams did we think we would have transitioned so far away from having a two-parent household, you know. And quite frankly, I mean, those families that are being led by one-parent households, you know, the parents working and children are raising each other, you know what I mean? And so, and then on top of that, then you have also that generation gap where you have grandparents and great-grandparents or great aunts or whoever raising the child as well. And you know, and so when you start coming out with new math, for example, go figure that, new math, what you're doing is you're creating a larger gap between that grandparent or great grandparent and the child. So when the child gets home and they're seeking help from the parent or a great grandparent or whoever, or guardian that's raising them, they're like, I don't know what to do. You know, we used to do it this way. Well, now they're setting rules and parameters on how to get to the same answer. You know, 2 + 2 is 5 in some people's world, but it's 4 in mine. You know what I mean? So it's absolutely crazy.
Let me ask you this, because this is an interesting phenomenon. When you look at, you know, the number of failing schools, which happens to be in inner cities, and there are, and let's be clear, there are some schools that are succeeding.
Yeah,
For those schools
absolutely.
that are failing, what has been, and Ben, I'll ask you this, Ben, you know, what have been some of the policies that maybe we should push if we know that schools are failing, and if we know that in some cases this could be the only thing that gives kids a real opportunity at life? Your thoughts, Ben?
Well, it starts with, you know, funding follows the student, and that's pretty simple.
Mhm.
Why I go back to the point that Terrace was making just a minute ago, that, you know, educational choice is huge. People don't think about all the forms of educational choice, but the one that's most common is people will flee a failing school district because they have the money to go buy and pay for a mortgage in a district with a better school system. That's school choice. And yet a lot of people who exercise that kind of choice don't want to let other families exercise choice in different ways,
Mhm.
who may be lower income. They have the options limited. They can't afford transportation. You know, they can't. So if we give families in the failing schools, and it may not just be the failing school, it may be a kid who's in a school that's doing okay, but he's getting bullied or she's getting bullied. Families want the kid in a safe school environment, right? They want to give them the money, the access, and the power to choose what works for them, and then the school has to respect them as a customer. And that's, you know,
Mhm.
Michigan has a good public charter school sector. These are publicly funded schools. They're publicly accountable, but they provide different kind of programming, and the parents have to choose them for them to stay open. If parents don't choose them, they're not going to succeed. That's the kind of accountability you need, accountability to the parents, and let them make those choices.
Terrence?
I want to add to that as well. And another thing too, man. First and foremost, poor teachers should be fired. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, there's no question about it. I mean, you know, what educators do on a daily basis, man, in the classroom. I mean, you are actually asking educators to be everything under the sun. I mean, like it's no longer taking a child and teaching them the basics of sentence structure. You know what I mean? Or their alphabet or whatever. Well, really, they should come to school knowing their alphabet. But it's no longer that. I mean, I am now the therapist. I am now the parent away from home. I'm now the doctor. I'm now the disciplinarian. I'm the psychologist. I'm all of it, you know. And then, but then at the same time, you're asking for all this stuff, but they didn't go to school for that. You know what I mean? Classroom management is key. You know what I mean? So if you can't manage a classroom, that's half of the battle. So what ends up happening is, pay obviously is a factor in there, but also I think if we invested more on the front end instead of on the back end, I think we would probably see a little bit better. Because I'm gonna tell you what, I'm a former Head Start director,
Mhm.
and when I was in that preschool world, I saw the tremendous benefits of children getting that quote unquote head start, because their brains are forming, and they have is firing off on all cylinders. I mean, they're soaking in all this information. So what better way to give a kid a launching pad early on in life than to invest more in preschool on the front end? But no, it ain't like that. Now they're investing in college and secondary and post-secondary. But when you build a house, a lot of that money goes into the foundation.
Mhm.
When you build the Willis Tower, or Sears, formerly known as the Sears Tower, or the RenCen in Detroit,
It's still
you know how
called the
much.
Sears Tower.
That's right. That's right.
That's
You know
right. That's right.
how much money went into building or constructing the base or the foundation of it. I guarantee you, tons of money went into that. But no, they want to invest in the chandeliers, in the paint, in the curtains. You know what I mean? So I think more investment on the front end, I think we will see a better result as we go forward. But other than that, education, in the words of my great senator, Dr. John Bison, in the state of Michigan, he said education needs to be re-engineered. I don't think it actually shifted with the times. We're more in the technology age. Well, in college, they're not teaching technology. They're still teaching on this other stuff. But I don't think it shifted with the time for technological advancement, truthfully. And so I think we have a gap there as well that we need to improve on.
Ben, let me ask you this question. Now, following COVID-19 and the pandemic, how has education changed? And is this going to be a problem moving forward for poor school districts, or more of the low income school districts? What role is COVID-19 going to play in that?
Hmm. Yeah, so I mean, to go back to the beginning, the very framing of this whole discussion, right? We have all kinds of statistics that show that Michigan schools were not living up to the results they needed to before the pandemic arrived. And that is just, and as Terrace was alluding to, the system is functioning like, a factory system. It's like we're trying to make a Model T Ford, drive on a modern highway, right? And it's just, it ain't gonna work.
That's true.
That's a good Michigan analogy, right? Everybody likes
Yes,
cars.
sir.
So, I mean, what the COVID-19 situation has done, I mean, it's, first of all, it's opened the eyes of a lot of families. When the remote learning switch happened, some districts took weeks to get kids learning again, if at all, during the rest of that school year last year. And then you had a lot of, especially like you mentioned, urban school systems with minorities, and a lot of kids just disappeared from the system, right? There's a lot of distrust between these families and government institutions to begin with. And that's just like blew it wide open, right? And these kids are just out of touch. And now the gaps that we've seen for years, the achievement gaps we talked about, and especially I think in the area of math, I think we're going to see a real, once we get the data coming back in soon, we're supposed to be taking some testing this spring. I think we're going to see some real gaps in math between high income kids from stable families and low income kids from unstable families. And it's a big issue, and one that's not easily remedied. But if we go back to trying to do education the way it's been done before, and like we're doing with these federal bailouts, where we're just putting money back into the system and trusting the system to get the job done, we're going to be disappointed. But these kids, I shudder to think about the effects it's going to have on a lot of these kids' lives. So,
Terrace, let me ask you this: there was a film on Netflix recently that came out that talked about. It was a book highlighting this film. It was called "Weapons of Math Destruction."
Oh, wow.
Your thoughts on this? What role is math going to play in the future of tomorrow's workforce?
Very good question. Math is at the front and center, because if you look at the way that that our world is moving, you know, as far as technology. You know, you look at President Trump with Space Force, all that's math. You know what I mean? It was math back during the time they sent the man to the moon. So math is only going to be even that much more important simply because it's at the forefront of everything that we do. You know, and Ben's absolutely right. I mean, we're going to see larger gaps, especially for those districts that did not get back to in-person teaching sooner. You know, it's really mind-boggling to me, man, that we talk about folks who are underserved and underrepresented and misrepresented or not represented at all, that are impoverished, that are whatever, you know, whatever other label they want to give them, but yet they chose to keep the schools closed, you know, because then you have special needs students as well that need that one-on-one interaction, that need that up close and personal touch. And what about the teachers? You know, some people neglect the fact to understand that teachers need that. Why? Because teaching is learning. It goes hand in hand. And so it's just really unfortunate how this pandemic has played out as far as our educational system, man. I mean, you know, and unfortunately, our kids are going to be left carrying the bag later. You know what I mean? And it's going to be to their own demise.
Ben, let me ask you this: when we talk about education reform and why schools are failing, what's the biggest elephant in the room?
There are lots of big elephants in the room, but when you're talking about this particular issue, I think I point to twin beasts. One is a really rigid state bureaucracy that has too much power over kids' lives. The other one is the labor unions and the power they have over schools. And I think we saw it just today. There was a news headline in one of the more affluent districts in the metro area where 100 teachers in the Grosse Pointe School District decided to call in sick, staged a little mini strike because they didn't like that the school board said we're going to reopen with the CDC safety procedures, the 3 feet social distancing and these things. And you're like, what, whose side are you on? I mean, we're trying to open the school safely, and right, you know, these kids have learning needs. The parents are just going to get more and more frustrated because the labor unions, and it's happening in Detroit School District, I've seen a lot, where they just really drag their feet on wanting to get back into the classroom.
Hold on, Terrace. I want to ask you personally. You know, right now, people say, you know, there's been talk that folks have said, oh, you know, the teachers' unions, you know, the teachers are not appreciated. What role has the teachers' unions, if any, played in the demise of public education, if any?
Man, they play a huge role. I mean, you know, I've been on both sides of the coin, man. You know, I started out as a teacher, and then the majority of my career has been in administration. Teachers unions, they play a key role because their focus is on the teachers. Their focus is not student centered. You know what I mean? It's about what's best in the best interest of those teachers. You know, they don't exist in the scheme of things to decide, you know, what's best for the student and the families. That's not their function. It's really based on, you know, what's best for the profession or for those professionals, right? So they get to do what is called collective bargaining. You know, they get to determine, you know, certain things as far as like when to have conferences and when not to have. I mean, they get a selection of that stuff, man. You know, but they negotiate that stuff, and unfortunately, parents and students are not at the forefront or the center of that stuff. So case in point, and this is how you get it. This is how you end up with situations where poor teachers still get to hang around. As a matter of fact, in my experience, past experience, you know, I'll show you how this impacted. We had a teacher that hadn't showed up for work in 2 years. All right, 2 years. And some way, somehow, they were able to still negotiate her getting tenure. Now imagine that. It takes 4 years to get tenured. She had only served 2. The other 2, she was MIA. And somehow, you know, who suffered the most? The students did. Why? Because they had to settle for a sub to come into a health class. Now, when you get somebody who is a sub that might have been a music major somewhere, but now they're teaching health. Come on, man. So to answer your question again, teacher unions play a huge role because, again, in my opinion, that teacher should have been let go immediately. You know what I mean? And someone else actually brought into that class that was highly certified to actually teach a health class, and not somebody who was might have majored in music or might be a community performer somewhere. So my point is that they do play a key role, man, and that's exactly why we're in the condition that we're in now.
We got a couple more minutes left. I want to ask this to both of you. I'll start with you, Ben, and then Terrace, I want you to pick it up. A few years back, a group of Detroit Public School students got fed up and said, we're suing the state because we have a right to literacy. We have a right to learn how to read. Your thoughts on this? I mean, when you mentioned the teachers union, should there be a students union? Should there be students who said, hey, we're fed up, we're sick and tired of not learning anything in the classroom? Ben, I want you to start off. What happens when you literally have students who sue the state because they're not learning how to read? Your thoughts?
Yeah, the fact that situation even had to happen is, it's a terrible indictment on the school system, and that could be our thesis right from the beginning. Michigan schools failing. Kids in Detroit had to sue the government because they're not learning how to read. I'll take a quick side tour on the literacy issue because it's one of my passion issues, and that our schools that teach teachers, that train and prepare teachers, it's getting a little better in recent years, but by and large have not been teaching them the best practices in the science of literacy instruction, phonics and phonemic awareness and comprehension, the things we know. Kids, especially with dyslexia or kids who come from homes where they're not read to, these are the things they need. And we're not preparing our teachers. We haven't been. We need to do a lot better at that. So, but back to the point, students, students need a voice. I really, appreciate the fact that they had to speak out. I think the solutions they were seeking in that court case were probably not the best, because they were just hoping for more money to come be the solution to the problem. I'd like to say, here, why don't we give that money and give it to you and your family, and you go take it and you go purchase, whatever kind of education you need, whether it's private school tuition or whether it's private tutoring support or learning at home materials to help you make up for it. But you can spend that money better than the institution that failed you has been able to spend that money. So, yeah.
Terrace, your thoughts? These kids literally marched to Lansing and said, we're going to sue you because we have a right to read. Your thoughts?
Amen to that. Good for them. I'm so proud of them. Matter of fact, I remember that I was clapping for them, but I don't let the parents off the hook, man. I never let the parents off the hook. Again, schools are supplemental, and to expect that a teacher who gets to see you, 7 hours out of the day, is going to wave a magic wand for about 20 to 25 kids in their classroom. What if all 25 can't read? That's asking them to be Superman. I think, honestly, there needs to be more disciplinary action or policy that speaks out for the parents, to hold them more accountable. You know what I mean? There's absolutely no way on God's green earth, unless you obviously have some other things going on, but there's absolutely no way on God's green earth that a child should be coming to kindergarten not knowing their alphabet, not knowing how to spell their names, not knowing their addresses and stuff like that. See, at Head Start, we did all that stuff. You know what I mean? And so, but there's no way on God's green earth I can give parents a pass, because if this truly is a partnership, you play a key and vital role to giving that child what it needs or what he or she needs prior to actually going there. That's absolutely crazy to expect that you can drop your child off with somebody you never met a day in your life, don't know their background, don't know where they went to school or anything about them, but you drop your most prized possession off to them for 7 hours out of the day and expect for them to teach them how to read. it doesn't work that way, man. I mean, they should come with some kind of skill even before they get to kindergarten. So I'm rooting for the teachers on that one because I'm an educator by profession, and but I do believe that you do hold teachers accountable as well because they're the ones that also went to school to learn, phonics and learn different strategies and pedagogy and all that stuff on learning how to help aid those families with helping their child be successful. So both play a key role, and both have a responsibility to make for sure that those kids are successful.
So, Terrence, I want to follow up with you with a question on that. What is the role of African American male teachers in the classroom in majority African American communities? Does it matter, or does it create an impact?
It matters. It matters. I'm one of the ones in 2012 that actually was laid off by Battle Creek Public Schools, but that was and unfortunately, that was under a Black president, under a Black superintendent, female superintendent at that. But so I don't know, if I get into the ethnicity piece, but Black men do play a key role, especially to Black students, because it plays a role. I actually saw something on Facebook, for example, and I had some students that it was a survey that said, your first Black male teacher, first male teacher. And they were like, Mr. Todd. I'm like, wow. And I taught sixth grade. And I just so happened to be an African-American gentleman. But imagine that the first time that they actually laid eyes on a male teacher or mentor, quote unquote, was in sixth grade. And so it does play a key role. And I still have wonderful relationships with those students to this day. Matter of fact, a lot of my first students are like 34, 35 years old now. And every now and then, they'll contact me or we'll go out to breakfast or dinner or something like that. And so I have a good relationship with my students, man. So Black males, I believe, play a key role. And I think that in your urban districts, I think they need to become a little bit more intentional on making for sure that Black males are hired. As a matter of fact, I just signed up for a virtual roundtable that's celebrating Black male teachers. I think it's sometime in May. And but we have to get better at recruiting those individuals and at least making it worth their while, because a lot of Black males aren't going into education. Let's be honest with that. I mean, so but what few that are going into education, we need to make it look at least attractive enough for them to remain there and make it worth their while, because they're not technically going into education. They're going into like business and other things like that.
Ben, let me ask you this. What role does competition play in this new global world? I mean, this global economy where, in 10 years from now, we may not even have dollars. I mean, when the era of Bitcoin and in the era of the .com, what role does technology and competition play in as relates to the public education?
Well, yeah, and this is one of the fundamental things that if you go back to one of the great, the idea guys, the thinkers behind the educational choice movement, Milton Friedman, was influential. If you don't know about Milton Friedman and you're on this video, you got to go look him up and read some of his stuff. Brilliant guy. Wrote some of the early
Rutgers graduate. I just got to put that out there.
There you go.
Get your plug in. Yeah, I mean, he identified that the lack of competition is an endemic problem in the public education system. We see it in every other, well, not every other, but many other spheres of our lives, the economy.
Yeah.
I can't remember, one of the economists has pointed out, what kind of world would we live in if you got assigned to your neighborhood grocery store? Because you live in this neighborhood, you got to use this grocery store. Residential assignment. That's how our school system works. But what if that doesn't, what incentive does that give for the grocery store to provide you good prices, good service on the things you need to feed your family? The same basic concept works in education. And I was pointing to one thing. There's a good study I'm aware of out of Florida. Florida is a national leader in educational choice, and they have one of the most largest and successful programs that provides scholarships to well over 100,000 low-income kids, mostly Black and brown, who are benefiting by having a choice to go to private school. And a study showed that anytime, based on the number of private schools in an area, based on those kind of things, the public schools would increase their performance because they were afraid of losing those students. So there's evidence that a little competition injected into the system by giving parents the right to exit if they need to can make a big difference. That's a part of the equation.
Gentlemen, before we close, I mean, this is an interesting conversation because, when we talk about, the direction schools are going, now we're talking about COVID. Now we're talking about, the fact that math is really the great equalizer. I mean, this really speaks to, there is a crisis in public education. I mean, we know it's there. So now the question is, how do we actually fix it? I want to open it up. Just final thoughts. I'll start with Terrace. Todd, final thoughts on where do we go from here?
Well, first and foremost, quit throwing money at a failing system. You know what I mean? Failure should never be rewarded. I think it's the wrong practice. I think, Brandon, that's what I really loved about working with the Trump administration and under Betsy DeVos at the U.S. Department of Ed, because they truly believed in what Ben was talking about, that competition. The money should follow the student. I mean, the money belongs to the student, for goodness sake. And if we continue to encourage and engage more parent groups and parents to take back charge of their schools, I think we would see something different. And quite frankly, I think school districts should compete for your child because, listen, children are the heritage of the Lord. According to the scriptures, that's a gift. And so if you want my child at your school, you should be competing for them like the colleges do, public colleges and universities. I mean, my daughter, my second oldest daughter now, and my oldest daughter, they were getting all kinds of mail, saying, hey, come to our school and we'll do this and we'll do all that. How come K-12's not doing the same thing? And so they should be competing for our child. You know what I mean? Why should I send my child to your school district? What do you have to offer? What's your graduation rates? And so again, we can't continue to keep throwing money at this stuff that's failing. And so if you ask me, where do we go from here? We hold people a little bit more accountable to just that. We fire poor teachers. We get parents more involved to take back control of their school districts.
And Ben, final thoughts.
Yeah, can I just say ditto? Because I can echo those sentiments completely, because if we don't empower parents to make good choices and give them some skin in the game, I think, and do the same, I think also giving students some level of choice over the pace of their education, over we're talking about proposals where we're giving students more ability to choose courses from different places outside their school district. So hold them accountable for it. Kids will rise to the challenge most of the time if you hold them to expectations. So high expectations for kids, and giving parents the rights and the responsibility to choose the best education so they can partner with those educators who are going to be accountable. Break down some of those barriers of entry into the system. So, great teachers can get in without having to jump through a lot of hoops to become a teacher in the classroom, and take the power away from the bureaucrats and the state capitals and give the money to parents, and they can do at least as good as being done today.
All right, folks, you've heard it here. I want to thank my guest, Terrace E. Todd, former White House Executive Director of Educational Excellence in Washington, D.C., now with the Heritage Foundation, and Ben DeGrow, expert extraordinaire education and policy director with the Mackinac Center for Policy. Gentlemen, thank you for coming on the show today. Folks, you've heard it. Why are Michigan schools failing? You just heard it. Tune in. This will be on Facebook and Twitter. Until our next conversation next month, we are talking, should D.C. become a state? Your thoughts next month. Take care.